happy to see such a wonderful turnout. Just about everywhere, and everyone coming. And it just goes to show how much people are concerned about the Omnibus Bill, and how much we all need to learn about it. First, I'd like to introduce.
And how much we like Megan Leslie.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to take a lot of time because Megan doesn't need any introduction. But I want to say from the time she arrived on the Hill, people knew they had someone really special. So special, I always like to remind people she was named McLean's Rookie of the Year when I first took office. Anyhow, it's not everyone that I would get out of bed with a broken ankle for, but I would with Megan, because I believe in Megan, and I believe in her commitment to poverty and her work on poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, Megan Leslie, our honorable member.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. That's quite the welcome, and actually really lifts my spirits because I've been working on this presentation and it's totally depressing. So it's nice to be in community and be around people who are working to make change in our community, because every day when I'm in Ottawa in Parliament, I'm faced with some pretty tough stuff, right? Some pretty strong attacks on, I think, who we are as Canadians and what Canada, how Canada imagines itself, or used to imagine itself. So I was asked by Occupy to come down and just talk about what happened in Bill C-38. So this was the Omnibus Budget Bill. I wasn't asked to do an analysis or to talk about next steps. We only have an hour. It's a brown bag luncheon. So I thought what I'd do is like literally sort of go through and talk about what some of the changes are. Admittedly, I'm a little nervous about doing this because it is a bill that was 421 pages. And normally, or historically, budget bills have been about 30 pages. So this is a grand departure in terms of size and volume. And the thing that makes me nervous is partly, welcome, grab a seat, partly making sure I can cover everything, but partly even presenting to a group of people like I'm an expert when I know there's stuff in this budget bill that passed, right? It passed, law, and I know there's stuff in there I don't know and I don't understand. There's stuff in there that I missed. So if you have questions, I'll answer them the best I can. If I don't have an answer, I can go and try and get that answer, do a bit of research. But this is a huge, huge document that, in preparing for today, I actually went over our initial review of the budget bill, and it was laughable to read. I mean, this is our top-notch crackerjack researchers, right? And I'm reading our first analysis, and it's like, it might do this, or it might do that, and we're not sure. And it says this, but we think that it might mean this. Like, our first analysis was really just down and dirty, reading this thing and trying to figure out the very basics of it. Of course, we evolved from there, but one of the huge problems with this bill is the process, how it did get passed. Okay, I'll get started. In March of this year past, there was a budget. The budget is different than the budget implementation bill. The budget is broad brush strokes, the Minister of Finance saying, this is what we envision for the next year, this is where we're going to be putting our resources and how we're going to be allocating our resources. So that happened in March. We did hear announcements about changes to old age security and changes to health transfer payments, but we couldn't see the nuts and bolts of it. So debate started on these sort of broad brushstroke ideas. But even at that broad brushstroke level, the Parliamentary Budget Officer did an analysis of just the budget, and he estimated that Canadians, 43,000 Canadians would lose their jobs because of the budget. And that was before we actually saw the nuts and bolts of the implementation. After the budget was announced, we had this introduction of Bill C-38, And people call it an omnibus budget bill or an omnibudget. What does that mean? It was a budget bill that had a lot of pieces of legislation that were changed or altered or repealed, packed into one piece of legislation. So just to give you an example, there were changes to the Assisted Human Reproduction Act in the budget bill. Arguably, we need to change the Assisted Human Reproduction Act because of the Supreme Court of Canada decision that came down, and sure, I'm all for it. You know, it's something I actually care about. But why is it in a budget bill? And frankly, as somebody who cares about that piece of legislation, I didn't have time to look at what was happening, right? There's so much in this bill that I didn't even get to follow up on things I was interested in and have a stake in. So 421 pages, like I said, in broad brushstrokes about that bill. A third of the budget bill was about changes to environmental legislation. Another theme, if we're going to talk themes, certainly one theme was environmental legislation. Another theme, I would say, would be a less transparent and more secretive government, changes that allow that to happen, like getting rid of some powers of the Auditor General.
Yeah.
And I would say another theme would be really, actually, a theme unto its own would be reducing the powers of the Auditor General. That's quite something, so reduced oversight, and I'll get into what some of those details are. So those are sort of the big themes, but then we do have other changes, like changes to old age security, changes to employment insurance, etc. So I thought I'd go through what some of the changes are, and maybe I'll save environment for last because it's probably the area I know the best, and like I said, a third of the budget was dedicated to this. Does that work for how we do this? Folks? Okay.
Yes.
So starting with the transparency and accountability piece, the single largest move to reduce that transparency and that accountability was taking away powers of the Auditor General. So the Auditor General, can actually look into whether or not our government agencies and departments are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing, how they're doing it, what they're doing. And what's been eliminated is the ability for the Auditor General to deal with the following 12 agencies. So, welcome. The Auditor General can no longer investigate the Northern Pipeline Agency, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Canada Revenue Agency, which is really problematic, Canadian Transportation Accident Investigation and Safety Board, Canadian Institutes of Health Research, Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, the Exchange Fund Account, Natural Sciences, Engineering and Research Council, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, the Canadian Polar Commission, and Yukon Surface Rights Board. So the Auditor General actually can't do investigations on any of those boards or agencies anymore. There is no longer, it's been dissolved, Public Appoints Commission, so that's gone. I'll talk about this in environment as well, but now when a decision about a major energy project, like a pipeline, for example, if the National Energy Board says, you know what, this is too great a risk, this pipeline shouldn't go ahead, the Cabinet can reverse that decision. So even though we have oversight, some may argue National Energy Board is not really fantastic, robust oversight, but even when we have oversight on some issues, Cabinet can now say, actually, no, we're going to just do what we want. So big attack there. A lot of people have read about old age security. That one is pretty cut and dry. Old age security and guaranteed income supplement, you used to be able to collect at the age of 65, and now it will be the age of 67. It's grandfathered, so it's not going to happen immediately. Interestingly, Stephen Harper was actually the cutoff age for, if you're his age, you can still collect it at 65. Hopefully it's just coincidence. So that one's pretty straightforward. On jobs, labor, employment insurance, there's a lot of information here I can't give you because there's a lot that we don't know yet. One thing about this bill is it actually transferred a lot of powers, gave, for example, the Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development certain powers, but then said, and we'll give you the details in regulation. So we actually haven't seen some of the regulation. I think there's some regulations out, for example, around the Environmental Assessment Act, but we haven't seen a lot of the regulation yet that will actually have the nuts and bolts of a lot of these changes. But one power that it gave the minister, it gives the minister the ability to define what is a reasonable search for work and what is regulation. So we actually haven't seen some of the regulation. I think there's some regulations out, for example, around the Environmental Assessment Act, but we haven't seen a lot of the regulation yet that will actually have the nuts and bolts of a lot of these changes. But one power that it gave the minister, it gives the minister the ability to define what is a reasonable search for work and what is suitable employment. So there's been a lot of speculation in the newspapers about what that might look like. There's been a lot of concern from workers' rights organizations saying, what will this look like? How does the minister define what is suitable work? If I am a 50-year-old teacher nearing retirement, does that mean that I go work in the mines? So there's been a lot of speculation in the newspapers about what that might look like. There's been a lot of concern from workers' rights organizations saying, what will this look like? How does the minister define what is suitable work? If I am a 50-year-old teacher nearing retirement, does that mean that I go work in the mines, for example? And there was one day I was standing in the House, or I was sitting in the House, and we asked a question about what do these rules changes mean, what's going to happen, and it was, that smiley parliamentary secretary, what's his name? I'm going to forget his name, he's quite smiley. He's the only one, so I remember. And he stood up and he said, for example, we have a strip mine in Newfoundland that needs workers. And we were like, what are you talking, like, are you actually saying that the scientists you laid off should be working, or like nannies? Like, what is suitable work here? Who are they sending to the strip mines in Newfoundland? But we don't know yet, and we don't know what a reasonable search for work is. We've heard the minister musing about, well, if a job opens up within an hour of where you live, but we just don't know what that means, so we'll be watching for that. The Employment Equity Act no longer applies to federal contractors. Small piece, but that's an attack on women and First Nations Canadians, or Aboriginal Canadians, and visible minorities for sure. Agriculture, food safety. The Seeds Act has been changed so that it allows, it hasn't created this yet, but it allows private contractors to do food inspection work and other work, other CFIA functions, so Canadian Food Inspection Agency functions. So the legislation is there that sort of opens the door that that can be contracted out, which is very worrying. Also, no more oversight by the Auditor General. On health, this bill actually put in writing what we knew was coming down the tube because the Conservatives were talking about it, but it actually enacted this change in healthcare transfers. So healthcare transfers would be given to the provinces. There was an escalator clause of 6% a year, so they would go up 6% per year, and the Conservatives promised to do that in the last election. I know because I was a health critic at the time, and I was on a lot of panels where we were asked the question point blank, what would you do if you were in government? And they said, we'll keep up the 6%. It's changed, it's now 3%, so it's been reduced, but it's also based on the GDP of a province. So this is really difficult for us here in Atlantic Canada. It's going to mean less money for us where we do have an aging population, and where a lot of our workers are going where? To Alberta, where they have a higher GDP, and so they will therefore get more money. So it's really going to uneven the playing field when it comes to federal transfers for health care. A small aside, the Minister of Health also has the power to eliminate or not eliminate, to exempt certain products from the Food and Drugs Act. Immigration, a crazy thing happened where there was this huge backlog of applications for federal skilled workers. Very big backlog. Does anybody remember how many? I want to say 20,000, but no, it's in the thousands for sure. It's a huge backlog. It's wiped out. So anybody who applied before February 27, 2008, even though the backlog is the fault of the government, even though you put in your application and you're waiting and you're doing everything right, they've all been wiped out. To deal with the backlog, the government decided it's best to start over again. There is a court case in process. I don't know if there are results yet. I haven't kept up on that. But it's good to see that people are fighting back on that. There also is a new class of permanent residents called the economic class. So that's to try and encourage skilled workers coming to Canada. I don't know what that means. I haven't done the analysis of that. So if folks around the table here have an idea, please feel free to share. And then on telecommunications, we have a foreign ownership rule for telecommunications, because telecom is pretty important to Canada and Canadian content. And for wireless telecommunications, the foreign ownership rules have been eliminated for wireless telecommunications companies with less than 10% of the market share. This is not my area of expertise. Again, this is not an area I can do much of an analysis on, but our critic, Charlie Angus, if this is an area that interests you, I can absolutely get you information on what the implications of that are. I wanted to share with you some response that we heard. So when a bill is introduced, it's introduced at first reading. It's just basically read, hear ye, the bill's introduced. Second reading, there's actually a debate in the House. We have a debate in the House. If a bill passes second reading, it's a majority of votes, it goes to committee. At committee, this is a time for us to see, well, is this bill good or not? Let's have people talk about it. Let's bring in experts. Let's bring in people from their communities. Let's bring academics. Let's bring people doing frontline work. Give us advice on what should change about the bill. What will the implications be if we do X or Y? How will that impact people in our communities? So at committee, we get to hear from these folks. And it's a wonderful opportunity in theory to make your bill better and stronger, to make amendments, to tweak things, maybe to rewrite things, maybe to totally eliminate things, right? To start over. I say in theory because not one amendment was made. Obviously, opposition parties moved amendments. We moved hundreds and hundreds of amendments. Frankly, even a couple were, typos that we tried to fix. Not one amendment was accepted. But at that stage where we get to hear from people, I say in theory because not one amendment was made. Obviously, opposition parties moved amendments. We moved hundreds and hundreds of amendments. Frankly, even a couple were, typos that we tried to fix. Not one amendment was accepted. But at that stage where we get to hear from people from community talking about what would this bill mean, we did hear some interesting stuff that I wanted to share with you. The Canadian Medical Association is very concerned about changes to old age security. They talked quite a bit about, look, seniors are having to make those decisions between paying for the medications or buying groceries. You're just making it even harder by pushing this off by 2 years. I don't know if everybody knows this, but I can't say in all provinces, but I can certainly say in many provinces, income assistance is lower than CPP, OAS, GIS combined, guaranteed income supplement.
All provinces.
All provinces? Thanks, Wayne. In all provinces, income assistance is lower than those pensions that you can receive. And so you actually can get a little step up out of poverty. But this is delaying it by 2 years at a critical point in someone's life. And it does mean that provinces are going to be on the hook for those 2 years for anybody who is on income assistance.
Is there a current reduction in the OAS, not the way of the GIF part of old age currently? Because I know lots of people are getting letters saying they're going to get, you know, $60 less a month, $80 less a month. Is that real?
I don't know.
I haven't seen the letter.
I
I've
haven't
just
had
heard
one come in my
about the
office.
letters, right?
I haven't had one come in my office. I'll check with Maita Blackloss, who's my
I have a
caseworker.
lady coming down from Ontario. I
Okay.
got a letter saying hers is going to be reduced
People do.
by $80 a month. That's a lot.
There
when
are
you're on.
reductions based on your tax filings. So if you filed your taxes in the spring, you might just be getting the letter now. So each year, the Guaranteed Income Supplement guarantees to bring you to a certain level. So if you go up or down, your GIS may go up or down, right? So, but I'll ask Maita if we're seeing that.
There's an article in today's Chronicle Herald about a Halifax man who's going down by 300 and he's asking and not getting any sort of answer.
Yeah, that's a different situation, but one of the problems is the federal government service agencies like Service Canada are so backlogged and so understaffed because they keep getting rid of staff. So it's more having to do with that. So the Canadian Medical Association has been pretty strong on the OAS front. Ken Giorgetti, the president of the Canadian Labour Congress, he testified and he said raising the age of eligibility for old age security guaranteed income supplement benefits is the worst possible way to deal with our retirement income security crisis. And he actually cites a lot of good data saying this is actually not the way we should be dealing with things. We had somebody testify from BMO Retirement Institute, so it's the bank, and they admitted under questioning that low-income seniors would be hurt the most by this. I mean, I know that's not rocket science, but sometimes you can't get them to admit these things. You know, CARP, which is the Canadian Association of Retired Persons, they come out very strongly against this as well. On the EI issue, we had very good testimony from Marjorie Griffin-Cohen, who's a professor, who said that these changes will have a particular impact on women. Changes to employment insurance will have a particular impact on women. She said when you go from making $14 or $15 an hour to $10.25, the minimum wage, that makes a very huge difference. This legislation will contribute to a low-wage policy, and the vast majority of low-wage workers are women already, so these policies will affect them, and I'd like the committee to understand that. So it was great we had some folks there actually applying a gender lens to this legislation. Andrew Jackson from the Canadian Labour Congress testified about the changes to EI, employment insurance as well. And he said, if you take the high unemployment regions in Atlantic Canada and Quebec, there's somewhere in the range of 10 unemployed workers for every job vacancy that's reported by employers. It would seem to us that we're very far from a situation where there are jobs going begging because unemployed workers are turning them down, particularly in the higher unemployment regions where wages are relatively low to begin with, obliging some subgroup of the unemployed to take significant wage cuts. This could further depress wages quite significantly. And Jim Stanford, who's a progressive economist, he said point blank, it's an enormous shortage of jobs, not a lack of workers, and not a lack of work ethic that explains the decline in the employment rate. Policy should be designed not to compel more labor supply, but rather to support Canadian families in an era where there's a chronic shortage of jobs that dominates the outlook of our labor market moving forward. Which I think, you know, was really good to get that information out, to get the truth about our economic situation out, to get the truth about the impacts of these changes out. But again, none of the amendments were accepted. Finally, I did want to talk about the environment piece because, like I said at the beginning, a third of the bill has to do with environment, has to do with gutting our environmental regulations. I'm the environment critic for the NDP, and this bill was so scary. So scary. And so MP dealing with the budget, environment critic for a party, you know, representing the environment issues, in contact with environmental groups all the time, looking at this bill day in and day out for 40 days, and there are still things in there that I didn't know. I was briefed on an issue recently to do a media interview, And our researchers showed me the changes to this issue. It's just a small issue in the budget bill. And I was like, what? I've never even seen this before. Right? That's how much is changed. Almost 100 pieces of legislation were changed with this one bill. So on environment, if you want to know what this budget was all about, this, in my opinion, this budget was all about the oil sands. It was entirely about the oil sands. Whether it's, you know, changes to EI to encourage folks to go work out on oil and gas projects, you know, and clamping down on wages. And when I look at the environment provisions, it becomes very clear. So what are some of the barriers to, or hiccups, or rules, or things that might slow down a big giant energy project like a pipeline project or oil sands expansion? What are some of those things? Because they've been eliminated. So science. Okay, well, we'll get rid of scientists. We lost a lot of scientists from Environment Canada. Science is a problem. Evidence is a problem. So we lost the National Roundtable on Environment and Economy. Environmental assessments are a problem, because those, man, might just turn out the truth, right? So the Environmental Assessment Act was repealed. It wasn't tinkered with, it wasn't tweaked, it was repealed. And that's a really tricky bill for me, or piece of legislation for me, because people say to me, well, Megan, if you were the Environment Minister, would you bring that bill back, or would you bring that, that law back, the Environmental Assessment Act? It wasn't great to begin with. 8 months ago, I was working with people in community and environmental folks around Canada to try and figure out how to make the bill better. Right? I was the one saying, this bill sucks. Let's make it better. And then all of a sudden, the budget comes out, and I'm defending a piece of legislation that had a lot of problems. But no worries, it wasn't tweaked, it wasn't tinkered with, it was repealed. So we don't want environmental assessments, because that'll get in the way of these projects. We don't want to protect habitat, because that will get in the way of these projects. So what happens? Government introduced changes to the Fisheries Act. Fisheries Act, you might think, gosh, that's a strange little act. Who cares about what's in the Fisheries Act? That was one of the strongest environmental protections we had. The Fisheries Act used to protect fish habitat. We had a lot of, you know, the folks would stand up in the House and say, we had a farmer's field that got flooded, and we were having a jamboree there, and because of the Fisheries Act, we weren't allowed to pump out the flooded plain for our jamboree, because it was deemed a fish habitat. That's not a fish habitat. Well, you know what? It is a fish habitat. Fish are opportunists. If the river floods into the field, the fish will lay their eggs there. It is a fish habitat for that period of time. If you pump it out, you pump out the eggs, you pump out the next generation of fish. Maybe there are other ways to deal with situations like this, because I know you gotta have your jamboree. But the way to deal with it isn't to just completely eliminate protecting fish habitat. So now, how the Fisheries Act reads, it protects fish of Aboriginal, commercial, or recreational importance. And by protecting, it prevents killing them. So you can kill fish food, you can kill the fish habitat, you can kill fish eggs in the next generation of fish. You can maim fish, you can deform fish, you can prevent them from being able to reproduce. You can have a fish with 3 eyes, and that's okay, as long as you're not killing it.